Hi, guys. Welcome to another segment of Legal Friday with me, Francine. So, every now and then, I get a flurry of requests for the same topic. It's always so interesting to me, the same exact topic. And last week, it was no different. Interestingly enough, last week, I got 3 requests for me to either do a blog post or a video segment on capital gains. Who would have thought? I started thinking to myself, what's going on this week where everybody's interested in capital gains? So I decided I was going to do a blog post and a video segment. And actually, as a little added benefit, I decided to create this one sheet that actually I will put a link to it in the chat where I include the video. So you can download it. It's free. It's yours to take. And it's just really a little easy thing to take a look at to understand 4 concepts: capital gains, capital loss, carryover basis, and stepped up basis. That's all. In the blog post, which is a lot longer and a little more involved, I included a lot of links to a variety of IRS resources, because the IRS, being the one that created all these laws, is the first place I always want to go when I want to know something about tax law or taxes in general. I will tell you up front, I'm not a tax professional. I'm not a CPA. I'm not a bookkeeper. I'm not a tax lawyer. I know just enough tax to make me dangerous. So I want you to understand this is simply an overview, and it's provided for educational purposes only. This is information for educational purposes only. I can't stress that enough. So let's get started. And again, I will send you the link to this, but it is so cool. Honestly, I worked on this myself. I've learned how to do Canva, and I just love this. Okay, enough about that. So first thing is here. Let's take a look. Let us take a look. So capital gains, the Internal Revenue Code, and again, this is just an overview. The Internal Revenue Code, again, which we sometimes call the code or the IRC, simply defines capital gain and capital loss as generally, and I say generally because there are so many exceptions, which is why you really need to have a tax professional help you with this if you've got specific questions. So it defines capital gain and capital loss as generally the gain or loss realized from the sale or disposition of a capital asset. It says sale or disposition. So why do you think it says that? Because sometimes the capital asset is gifted to you. Sometimes you don't even have to pay for it. It's just a gift. So it's sale or disposition of a capital asset. So how do we define capital asset? Well, simply put, and this is again a simple definition, it's not, there's a lot more that goes into it, but it's almost anything that you own and use for personal or investment purposes. Again, almost anything, almost everything that you own and use for personal and investment purposes. So some examples are land, buildings, jewelry, antiques, some household furnishings, automobiles, which could also include motorbikes, things of that nature, any kind of vehicle, business equipment in some cases, copyrights, intangible items like copyrights, like trademarks, like patents, like franchises, and stocks and bonds. Those are all included in the definition of capital assets. And that's just a small list. There's so many other things that are actually included. And if you take a look at some of the resources that I've included in the blog post, you'll see the IRS names tons of things. And it also tells you things that are actually not included in the definition of capital asset. So then you'll often hear the term either cost basis or basis. And I know for a long time, I didn't understand what that meant. What's a basis? So I'll tell you just generally, the basis is the price that you pay for an asset. It's the cost that you pay, or sometimes, again, you were just gifted it. So it's the cost of the item that you receive at the point you receive it. But let's assume you paid for it. It's the cost, the purchase price of the asset. And it's not just that, it's all of the expenses, whatever the expenses cost in order to get that. So for example, let's say you buy a piece of property. So you have to pay, especially if you went through a broker, you paid some kind of taxes, you paid commissions owed to an agent. I mean, if you got it as a loan, you had to pay interest on loans. I mean, there are all kinds of other things that go into making the cost basis. But it's important for you to understand that basically it's the price that you pay for a for a capital asset. You'll also sometimes hear terms like long-term and short-term capital gains. All that means is a long-term capital asset is if you've held it for more than a year. So if you've held that asset for over a year before you dispose of it, before you sell it or gift it away, your capital gain or your capital loss is going to be long-term. If you've held that asset for a year or less, it's going to be considered a short-term capital gain. I'll tell you, that's really important when it comes to the amount of tax you will pay. Again, that's why it's so important to talk to a tax professional when you're really trying to figure this out for yourself, because depending upon whether it's short-term or long-term, you may end up paying capital gains tax as opposed to ordinary income tax. And I'll tell you, capital gains tax in our country has a much better, much more favorable tax treatment than ordinary income. Probably because the government really wants to encourage people to hold on to property before getting rid of it right away. So that's one of the reasons. Okay, so here's an example, and this is in the sheet that I'm going to include. So here's an example for a capital gain. Let's suppose you purchase a piece of property in 1990 for $10,000. And let's say in 2022, now you still own that property. Okay, then let's say, and by the way, generally speaking, your basis is going to be $10,000. Okay, that was your purchase price. Then let's say in 2022, your neighbor decides that they really love that piece of property and you're open to it. You decide, okay, I'm going to sell it to my neighbor. And you sell it to your neighbor for $100,000, which is quite reasonable in 2022. Your basis was $10,000 because that's what you purchased it for. You sold it for $100,000. 100,000 minus 10,000 is 90,000. So you have a long-term capital gain of $90,000. Why is it long-term? Excuse me, because you got it in 1990, you got rid of it in 2022. Over a year has passed. Let's take a look on the other side of that. Let's suppose you purchased it in 1990. In 2022, the market is so depressed that the value of your land is now only worth $50,000. And that's what your neighbor offers you. Your neighbor says, I'll give you $50,000 to take it off your hands. You're like so desperate for the money right now, you say, okay. So you have a capital loss of $50,000. It's not likely you're going to be paying tax on that. Why? Because it's a loss to you. It's a capital loss. It's a short-term capital loss because you held the property for over a year. Okay, let's take a look at another definition, carryover basis. And actually, I'm going to give you an example to help you understand what this means. So let's suppose you purchase a piece of property in 2000 for $10,000. And in 2019, you gift, again, keep in mind, you gift that piece of property to your child. You gift it, you're not selling it to them. Generally speaking, your $10,000 basis is carried over to your child because you gifted it to them, which means that your child, even 20 some odd years later, has the same basis that you had back in 2000, which is $10,000. But let's suppose 9 months later, your child, let's suppose 9 months later, after you gave this to your child, let's say they decided to sell the property for $100,000. Okay, that child's profit is now going to be $90,000 because his or her basis was $10,000, which is what yours was. And because it was a gift, he or she kept the same basis. They sold it 9 months later for $100,000. Their profit or gain is going to be $90,000. And he or she is likely going to have to pay tax on his short-term capital gain of $90,000. Why short-term? Because he or she only held it for 9 months, which makes it short-term as opposed to long-term capital gain. Here's another example of stepped-up basis, and this is just a little different. Let's suppose you purchased the land in 2000 for $10,000, okay? You now leave this piece of property in your will, let's say to your daughter. At the time of your death, the fair market value of the land is now $100,000. Your daughter's new basis is going to be $100,000. It's no longer $10,000 because you left it in a will and then you died. At the moment of your death, her basis became the fair market value, which is $100,000. Let's suppose she decides to sell the property for $101,000 the day after you die. Okay, it's likely she'll only have to pay tax on that $1, and it would be a short-term capital gain. But let's say 2 years later, she sold the property for $400,000. It's long-term because it's beyond a year, and $100,000, which was her basis, she sold it for $400,000 2 years later. She now has a long-term capital gain of $300,000. Okay, that was like a really simple, basic explanation of these terms. Again, I'm going to include a link in this, what I think is a really great handout. Actually, I just want to show it to you on, this is what it's going to look like. It's really cool. Actually, it's pretty cool, if I must say so myself. Okay, that's it for now. Any questions you have? Again, that's how I get to do these segments. Somebody says to me, Francine, would you do a video segment on such and such a thing? And if I can, I try to do it, or I write a blog post. Okay, that's it for now. I'm Francine. This is Legal Friday with me, Francine. And the topic today was an overview of capital gains 101. Bye for now.